I've been working with the issues around social injustice, why we do what we do to each other, on all sorts of different levels, globally and individually. I've been working with violence against women, particularly all of my life, and issues around conflict, um, just just what ghastly things we do to each other. You know, how we oppress each other, how the abuse of power just informs everything that goes on just about in this world. And for years I was working, I mean, with a range of different materials, but I was tending to work, I'm going to say intellectually. I was actually letting my head increasingly rule what I was trying to do creatively. And I got to a point where I just was totally and utterly blocked and I couldn't do anything. And the work showed that. It was absolutely dreadful. So there was a couple of years where actually I didn't do any work at all. Um, and just the hole inside me, I couldn't not work and I couldn't not express myself. So I then thought, well, what is it that I just love? I just love textures, I love colour, and I love landscape. So landscape for me informs so much of what I do. It says so much in terms of the histories, what lies under the land, how the memories of everything that goes on is there. You know, it is not going to go away. It will always be a witness. So I decided I would just use materials that, materials and the fire, to allow the materials to speak for themselves through the process of fire. And that's what I did. So I then just made casts of my own body and filled them with a whole range of different materials, clay and metals and you name it, earths, everything, and put them in the kiln. And they just spoke for themselves. Those things, the bodies that were coming out, I could not possibly have done myself. They tore apart, they exploded, they became incredibly vulnerable around various, different areas where different materials were working, trying to blend or knot together. And I decided I just would not look back from there. So from that time on, I have just worked with a whole range of different materials, allowing them to speak for themselves. But within me, it is rooted in trying to tell a story around social injustice and just the horrors that we do to ourselves and to each other through the materials. But there's obviously huge beauty there too, and there's always, for me, a massive hope, because we will win through in the end. So moving on from the bodies that I was working on, I was particularly working with backbones and ribs, because the backbone is an incredibly vulnerable part of our body, but it's also our strength. And backbones are throughout everything. I mean, you can use it in metaphor, but also in the landscape, as our ribs, the containing of the memory and how things are held together, whether that's seams of rock, different layers of the geological stratas, whatever. There's the ribs are there throughout. And the landscape also, the scarring of the landscape that we do through what we do to the land. And I've recently started to work on the metal mines in the Cambrian Mountains. And when you go through those mountains, the scars on the landscape, and then what they reveal to us in terms of what has gone on underneath. So for me, the layering of work, whether it's using materials to layer, to reveal the different layers, so what's going on underneath the earth, what's happening on top, what's actually happening in political process, all of these things, it's multi-layered, and I'm using materials to reveal some of those different layers, and they will be interpreted in a multitude of different ways. So there's nothing literal about my work, but I'm using materials to reveal all of these elements that go into it. Within the clay, within the earth, within the minerals and oxides, within wood, within pulp, within everything, those memories are there to witness what has gone before. And for me, using fire actually reveals the injustices that have happened in the past. So while I'm working, while here with clay, I'm actually using the material to speak for itself. So I will actually manipulate the material, and here I'm using rocks, in this instant from the Cambrian Mountain metal mines. So I'm working these together, and these will then be put into the kiln, and there the actual, for me, the stories of those materials will be revealed. The land, not only in the mines but in many different instances, have been so scarred by human activity. So I will sort of replicate that within the materials. So I will help that process, and then that is it's reinforced in the kiln as well, because by putting different materials together within the kiln, they will tear apart. They'll either fuse together or tear apart or explode, and they will inevitably all transform. So I will be, while putting the materials together, I will be feeling that what's happened to the landscape, not only visually but actually physically, what's been happening in the past. I'm now opening the kiln, having fired it, and this would have been I fire with gas, and it'll be about a 12-hour firing. So I would have put the pieces in without knowing almost at all what will come out. So it's always an incredibly exciting and slightly sort of, I wonder what's going to be happening moment of opening the kiln, because I just don't know what will be revealed to me. What will the materials say? They will, will they actually be together? Will they have completely exploded? And when I first went back to working with clay, I think it was about a year of firings before anything even stuck together in any way at all. I mean, they were just always exploding, and partly I'm incredibly impatient when I work, so I just want it to happen sort of now, so it would fire it far too quickly or whatever. So these are very beginning pieces. These are just experiments of what these materials will do together. Will they stick together? Will they not? What will happen? So the clay and the spoil rocks from the mines actually have, on the whole, completely fused together, and to the point where at the beginning of this process I'd put a whole lot of different rocks in the kiln, thinking that I could try and understand what would happen. I mean, this is a very good example of where this was just, no rock is grey, but it was a big lump of grey rock, and this incredible red colour coming out of it. This exciting thing of, what's going to happen, what doesn't. But back to that sort of putting the different rocks in. And I was really trying to say, okay, this rock, might have some zinc in it. This one might have copper. This one might have iron or whatever. I will see what happens in the kiln, and they all just completely fuse together. And that was the end of that. So it has to be totally random. And then inevitably, sort of coming out the kiln, I then have to clean up. So this will be a bit of metal that has completely melted, and just spewed out onto the base of the kiln. So it'll be full of the sands. And these again are different metals that are in there, the rocks, the clay. They've just become one. And then here will be some of the oxides transforming. And again, they will change their colours and their textures. One of the things, when I first started going back to working with clay, I was just putting everything in the kiln. So I'd be putting the metal and glass and everything. I was working then on my own body and very directly around violence against women. And there were particular elements of the body that I wanted to be just metal. And it actually had to be just iron, because iron is sort of direct from the earth. And I wanted, rather than doing it in the kiln, which was not possible, I had to do it as a separate process. So I then started to work with cast iron, which was going to be fused with the ceramic and with different materials. And those first ones were building up the backbone with just iron, because for me the backbone is the strength and the vulnerability of a body, and indeed the whole landscape, because I just see backbones everywhere, whether it's in rocks, coming out of the earth, or wherever. And also then ribs, and for me the ribs contain memory, they contain a body. And again, for me, I can see these throughout the landscape, they're everywhere. So I was then needing to have a separate process, which was pouring the molten iron into my work. So I would work with the ceramic, and in this case also with wood and the metals from the mines. I mean the rocks, beg your pardon, from the mines. These would have already gone through the kiln process, so they would have already gone through the fire. And then I build up where I want the iron with materials that will burn away. So all of the pieces I'm putting in, like straw, polystyrene, paper, anything that will burn away, that will be replaced by iron. But it's that same process that I have absolutely no idea what is going to happen. So what will burn away, what will fuse, what will break, because inevitably, molten iron being poured onto ceramic or rock is going to break it. But it doesn't always, or sometimes it'll break it, but will actually then flow into the breaks and then fuse it back together again. So it's a process which is just exciting and unknown. And it's something that, because you never do know what's going to happen in this life, and what is beneath the ground, or what a memory is. And nothing is whole, everything is a fragment. So here I then cover the whole piece in sand. It's a foundry process, which has been mixed with sodium silicate. And then I have to make holes right the way through it, which I then inject with carbon dioxide, and that sets it absolutely hard. So then it's just completely encased. So this is, and that's now just like rock. So my work, once when I'm wanting to have specific pieces that have elements of cast iron within them, I then have to, it's another process, and I have to get a team of people together, because it's something one can't do alone. And it's about melting scrap iron in the cupola, which is there, and then that molten iron, which is a primeval sort of process, gets poured into the molds that I have made. And it's the most it's a wonderful process. And it's like, because all the pieces that are in the molds of mine have already gone through the one fire process, so that they've gone into the kiln, the rocks, not the wood obviously, but the clay has already transformed once and possibly blown up, split, done all the vulnerabilities that it's wanting to do. Then within the mold, having then molten iron poured into it as well, just creates another layer of transformation and change. And the iron will either sort of meld in with the work that's in there already, or it'll split it and then go into the into the cracks. But what is absolutely wonderful is you pour the iron in, and this almost white hot metal, and then it's just like fireworks, the explosions that are going on, and the steam, well, not the steam, the smoke as things are burning away, and it's just, yes, not knowing what's happening. And then once that's, then you sort of leave that to cool. And actually a lot of my molds within themselves are quite vulnerable, so some of them might split, which again changes the whole process of how that iron is going to interact with the materials that are in there and what they're going to do. And then once the iron has been poured in, then the process of opening those molds, which is incredibly exciting. So all of these pieces would have gone through fire more than once, and often 3 or 4 times if they've gone back into the kiln quite a few times. And this is the result now of afterwards. So the iron has been poured in, and I now have this absolute joy of opening up these molds. This always reminds me of, it's like an archaeological dig. I mean, but the kiln is also like that, opening the kiln. But these, I'm opening something that I really don't know what I'm going to find. Will it only just be a small fragment of something? Will it be in one piece? But I just don't know. So I'm working with a hammer and chisel, and just slowly breaking away the pieces of the mold to reveal what's underneath. And it's like Christmas. It's just fantastic. And because the other thing, as soon as I've made any of these molds, I've completely forgotten really what's in them. So even if it's only a few days later, I'm there opening something that I think, oh gosh, that's that one, or blimey, I had no idea that was going to happen with this. And they become their own beings. The other thing, of course, that happens also is the distortions. So when I'm making molds, inevitably